Welcome to Leadership Trademarked, the podcast where we explore what it truly means to lead in today's uncertain world. Built on decades of experience across industries, we go beyond theory to examine the real tools, challenges, and outcomes that define leadership today. In Season 1, we laid the foundation, bringing together voices from across sectors to uncover the core principles of effective leadership. Now in Season 2, we turn our attention to the existential challenges organizations face: uncertainty, rapid technology changes, and shifting generational expectations. We kick off the season with founding members Leslie Riley and Rosalind Kingsmill, sharing over 80 years of senior leadership experience, and myself, Sylvia Fraser, a leader driving inclusion and innovation in municipal government and public service. Supporting us behind the scenes is Finley Gain, whose tech expertise ensures our conversations reach you smoothly and professionally. So join us as we unpack real-world leadership with insight, purpose, and actionable strategies, helping you define and refine your own leadership trademark.
So welcome, Barry. We're really excited to have you here. We are finishing up Season 2 of a podcast that we've been doing for many months. We call it Leadership Trademarked, past tense. And our Season 1 was about conversations about leadership with leaders. Season 2 was about going a little deeper down the ladder and talking about engagement, in connection, in conversations, in listening, and asking questions. So we're excited to have you. There's two things that people do when they work. After they've said, sure, yes, I'll do the job, then their personality or their character is the kind of person that, you know, if you hired right, you can count on them. And we call that accountability. And then there's other people that are very smart, but you can't really count on them. There's always something left out, or you got to poke them, or you don't necessarily this or that them. But when you challenge them about that in a kind way, because you're a kind leader and you don't beat people up, you let them know that in one way or another, they've let you down. And their response is always reasonable. Well, I know I said I'd do it, but those other 3 projects got backed up, and so I had to do them first. And so when, in my experience anyway, leading and coaching and advising, when there is a problem with the vision turning into a measure of success, at the bottom of that muck, there is always a number of people who approach the job from what's reasonable. And when you get a team where there's too many of those, or they're in too many important positions, it just goes terribly wrong. On the other hand, if you get a team of people who are energized, feet on the floor, like the job, trust you, know their stuff, ask questions, don't take it personally, don't blame anybody, then you can rely on them. And I'll just do a plug about me here because it explains why I've said all this stuff. I discovered by the time I was about 28, that because I had moved up in a managing role, that I really had no idea what these 40 people that worked for me were doing. And I wasn't going to learn it because it wasn't my job. So I had to make it clear that I really needed to rely on them. I need to count on you because. So that's where we start here. And then, of course, Barry, I love the conversation we had because I agree with you on the concept that there is a difference between management and leadership. There is a difference. And it's important also to differentiate as well about how that works in a corporation, a small business, a government, whatever. So with that in mind, over to you. And Leslie, I think you could weigh in here for a minute.
Well, I'd like to hear what Barry has to say about the difference between management and leadership in your experience and in your own words, Barry. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think people throw around leadership as if it's something that fits into normal corporations and management. So you can have managers and they're not leaders at all. You can have leaders who may not be good managers, but leadership is something that has to do with your character. So that's where you start. It's who you are. Do you care for people? Are you plugged in? Are you sensitive to what's going on every day? And management can be by the book. Okay. In a large corporation, your chances of leadership are probably zero because of the way it works. Now, as you get into small business, and in my case, in the armed forces, but I don't want to get into the military aspect, leadership is very personal, very emotional, and the people being led and committing to that kind of goal of the leader. That is really the tricky thing. And when you've got it, it feels great. I'll give you an example. The American Armed Forces, whatever we think of them today, when the Second World War was over, they did an exit interview of over 10 million servicemen. Out of that came a lot of the motivation, hygiene concepts, all these things that we know about. But when they asked what they wanted from a leader, they didn't want bravery. It was about 92% say, I want him to listen. So there's where you start. It isn't you projecting forward and saying, I'm the leader, you're going to do what I say, and so on. You listen and you plug in and you become a family. This is what it's all about. This is very emotional. You see it in small businesses, much more difficult in large corporations. So I've run large corporations, and I have run small businesses, and I've run not-for-profit corporations. So they're all completely different challenges. So that's what I'd like to say. Management, yeah, you can go to school and learn about it. You don't go to school and learn about leadership.
That's really interesting. You know, Barry, one of my complaints about having gone to business school was that we learned lots of tools and probably what you're talking about in terms of more by the book. But when it came to that whole idea of how to be a leader, you don't get that in the business schools at all.
No.
So we have some questions here. They're more like scenarios. And so we thought we could just ask you some of these, set up some of these scenarios, and then you may tell us what you would do in this situation or what you think about that. So here's one. You mentioned small business. So here's one where you have a small business, 12 employees, and it was a startup 4 years ago. So now there's a lot of potential for growth and profit. You have a young staff that are well educated, competent, and dedicated to the business. How do you keep these people happy, challenged, and running tightly together as a team?
Excellent question. The big thing with a small business is that it seems a little easier because there aren't layers. So if you've got this business and there are 12 employees, you're unlikely to have a hierarchical structure. And I think that's very important. So the flatter your structure, the easier it is to show leadership. So constant communication is really, really important. In a dynamic thing like a small business, things are changing every day. And you're talking to people all the time, mostly one-on-one, but you can have coffee with them, you go to lunch, whatever it is. But the key is to make sure that everybody is plugged into what is it we're trying to do. Are we just trying to make a bunch of money? Are we trying to make this company something where an outside corporation would want to buy us out? What's the point? They need to understand that they are all very important portions of the team. And they've got to feel that. Now we're into pure leadership. When I think back to the beginning of IBM, for example, when they were really excellent, what they had were a bunch of small nodules, teams scattered all over the country, all over the United States, and they would be working on things separately. Eventually, they brought everybody into a great big corporation and offices and so on, and all of that entrepreneurial initiative and pizzazz disappeared. So going back to this small corporation, you want to make sure that you give them the possibility of growing. And one of the ways I see it doing it is you have to make sure that you give them individual tasks that are all part of the overall goal. And when you do that, and then they realize they need to talk to their fellow employees, that's where you really start to get the cohesion, the tight-knit cohesion in the business.
When they start to rely on one another do I have that right? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And it doesn't need to go through you. And for that, a person has to have the confidence to be able to let go. And it isn't that they're just running off. You've given them tasks to do. If you can slice it up, that's fine. You might have subgroups of 2 or 3 where they're given larger, more complex tasks. But the key basically is constant communication. And if I give you a small example, when any of my people walk into my office, first thing I do is I put down my pen, turn off my computer, and I come around the desk and sit with them. They need to know that they have my total concentration. Mm-hmm. And they can ask what they want. It can take a long conversation or not. If it's an easy thing, then they get the answer and away they go. I'm for them first and foremost. Whatever I'm doing is not important.
We don't look at your phone while they're talking either, do you?
Oh, yes. No, not a chance. Or my computer.
Yeah.
I close the lid on the computer.
And so, Barry, when you do that, what happens to the mood, the feeling, the feng shui between you and whoever? What's it like?
They know that we're in a one-on-one relationship, that I am listening. They have come to either report some sort of progress. Perhaps they've got a problem. They want to ask about it. We are plugged in. It's just one-on-one. And I think people really like that. It can be as long or as short as they want. They're in control of how long it is. I don't set any time limits at all. So if it takes an hour and we need to go to lunch, it takes an hour and we need to go to lunch. Whatever I was doing is set aside, because this person has come to me because they need advice or direction or help or whatever it is. And as a leader, you plug right into that.
So would it be fair to say that your intention of these meetings, right from the moment that you invite them, is to pay attention? I think we call that listening. Acknowledge them and behave in a way that they feel affection. I call it the attention, affection, and acknowledgement triad. Does that make sense?
Yes. The nice thing about it is that there doesn't need to be any preamble.
Right.
You don't need to pass the time of day or say how terrific it is. Right. Had a good sleep last night, or what did you do over the weekend? They come in, they have something they need to talk about.
You get right to it.
And so you're completely plugged in right from the beginning. So it's very, very efficient. That's the key, is that there's no dancing around.
Right.
Their time is valuable. My time is valuable. And they appreciate the fact that they get an answer or guidance or a discussion of whatever it is that they need to get solved.
Okay, so let me ask you another question. In your team or your department or your company, in a situation where you've got someone who is a subordinate but a senior manager and a friend, and you've worked with them for many years, so you know this person. So now there's an opening for the next level up, and there's a younger manager, and his track record is very good. And in fact, he is considered the best choice for the promotion. How do you handle that one?
That's probably the most difficult thing of all.
Yeah.
Once you get friendship and long business relationships with somebody, and you run into this kind of challenge. This happens, of course, in larger corporations. I think the way to do it is you've got to be absolutely honest with this long-term friend. And you bring him in and you talk to him and say, or her, and you say, okay, look, this is coming up. Here's what your strengths are. Here's what you've done for the company. We've got a particular position that doesn't quite match your skill level and your experience. So we've been looking to see if there's anybody who might be able to fill that in. We think we've seen somebody. It's difficult because this person has got far fewer years in the company than you do.
Yeah.
Here's what I want to do. You tell me what it is that you would like to do in the next 5 years or the next 2 years. I want to make sure that this company benefits from your experience, your skill, your knowledge, and I would like to set you up on a particular mission, job, task that will use all those years you've got of experience, and that will be of great benefit to the company. We shouldn't be thinking just in terms of bumping up to the next level of management. I want to pull you out of where you are, give you some kind of a job or a task that you and I agree on that will be challenging and fulfilling, and I'm going to make sure that you get all the credit for it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to benefit because of all these years of experience.
Okay,
a
Barry.
couple of things I really like about that kind of approach, Barry. And one is that, well, being open with the person, because everybody knows when they're hearing bullshit. So that idea of being open and honest is really important. The other thing, though, is that, but using the approach that you suggest is you're still focused on this person, this friend's strength, as opposed to saying, well, you're not really quite what we were looking for, this other thing. You're saying, these are your strengths. And this position doesn't really utilize those to the best that we could use your strengths. And then you have a solution that helps to create trust and hope for this person. So you're not pushing them aside because this job came along. You're saying it's not the right fit for you or for us, and so this is what I'm going to do to help you find that better fit. I think that creates a lot of hope and trust. Also two very important leadership jobs.
So Barry, I have to ask you a question now, and you can tell me you don't want to answer it, and then I'll cut it out. How did you learn to do that? It's rare.
I have to tell you honestly that it occurred throughout my career from the time when I first went off to the Royal Military College. You actually ran across this situation far more times than you can imagine. Well, all of you must have known it from various organizations and corporations. But we're back to my initial point. Leadership is about your personal attributes and about who you are as a real person. So if you've got those attributes where you care about people, you like to see them grow, you like to see them succeed, you like them to feel needed and wanted and part of an organization, you're dealing with everybody that way. And people are going to be all over the block, but that's what makes a strong organization. If you take people's strengths and make sure you meld them to the overall corporate or business or whatever the goal might be, I guess that's it. So I guess the truth is, and this was funny, I discovered this at the age of 17. I went into something, my dad had just sold his restaurant, and I went into something called the Summer Student Militia Program. I'd never really thought of going into the military. My dad was a Second World War vet, but didn't really appeal to me. So I went in, and we were 30 people in Hamilton, and I was a private soldier, and two things I loved were the Army, and people don't know this, is a pursuit of excellence. They want you to grow. They want you to be all you can be. And from that point on, I realized that an organization can be enormously successful if you take all of the fragments of people's personality and their skills and intelligence and education and everything else and fit them together and make them feel, not feel. See that they are part of success.
Thank you for articulating that, because not only do I believe it, but it's what I do. And when things are going wrong, especially today in this messy muck we're in, people are doing the exact opposite. And it's such a waste of time. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
I mean, really, thank you. I won't ask you when you learn to do the twist, but maybe you'll.
I won't remove that question because it's a great question. And what I love about it is you're turning this, what is traditionally a win-loss situation. One person gets promoted and the other person experiences a loss if they're not promoted. And you're turning it into an opportunity for this win-win situation where you're taking advantage of this like momentum of change. There's an opportunity for a promotion, and all people who feel like they fit into that role are going to be experiencing this emotionality. And instead of taking one of those people and granting them the change, you take both people and create a change that's better for both of them. And that I love that because it's such a simple reframe of what is this traditional situation. And instead you're approaching it from this very skillful and thoughtful way of let's work with these people to create these win-win situations.
So Finn, I want you to take the next question, however you want to say it.
Okay, Barry, I do have a question because I want to call back to you talking about how leadership is very different in small businesses and corporations versus large businesses and corporations. So I'd like to present a scenario that's in contrast to the small business one, which is you're a senior executive in this large and more mature company that's rumored to be a possible takeover candidate by a company which is both more diversified and is not well known for its people skills. So how does being a leader in this situation play out?
Wow, that is a terrific one. That is a problem or a challenge that is so difficult to handle. I think, first off, you have to be absolutely honest with everybody. What I would do is I would have people start researching this potential takeover company to find out, because, they might know in general that it's not very good when it comes to people skills. They might feel that it's got a reputation of taking over companies and then firing the whole hierarchy and basically changing the business. So that's the first thing, is you've got to find out who is this company really. Then if it's possible, and now we're into a delicate area because sometimes you get into boards of directors and shareholders and everything else who might be not in favor of this, or even worse, might be in favor of it and don't really care what happens to the people.
Right.
But it's a rocky period, and you've got to keep your people focused on what they're doing, but taking a look to see if there's going to be any possibility of an advantage. And you might start developing scenarios, say, okay, look, what if they take over and they want us to move, or they want us to go to another building, or they want us to go to another province, and start looking at some of these possibilities. How are we going to protect our staff? And it's not how we're going to protect our job, because we're generally talking about senior people. How are we going to protect the people who have committed to our company, who have been working diligently and emotionally and so on for years? And if you are senior management, you really have to start communicating with this potential takeover. You got to find out what they really are. And you have to start making some points about what are the strengths of your company. Never mind the bottom line and so on, but what is great about it? Why are our people really good? How are they going to make, if you do take us over, how are they going to make your company better? And I think when you do preemptive things like that, I don't mean you'll be successful, but you got to do the best you can. And I think when you do that, then the takeover company is not just a matter of a bunch of lawyers getting together and some bankers and so on, but they start to see this as a living, breathing organization that might very well inject some new blood and ideas and enthusiasm into their company And you might wind up with that company saying, wait a second, we've got some people here we think are better than the ones we've got. And the layoffs might occur in that company rather than the company being taken over. Very, very complex. But the key, again, is communicate with your people, make sure they're up to date on everything. And you might need to have some, I guess, disaster scenarios where you're going to have to start finding places for them. So you might want to be reaching to other companies without telling them. And eventually you'll have to, but start looking at where are companies that are sort of in the same business and so on going to need some of our people. They need to know that it's not just going to be a golden parachute and they're not going to be dumped.
Yeah.
Certainly for you, the people in the company being taken over have to be seen as protecting their people, caring about them, and somehow minimizing the damage and the loss.
All right.
That is a complex scenario. And I have a question out of curiosity, and you can tell me if it's a good question or not. But I'm curious, how would someone approaching that situation with a mindset of a manager versus a mindset of a leader approach it differently? Like, what might be those main differences you think that emerge when navigating a complex situation like this?
I think the person who is just a manager is going to be thinking of nuts and bolts. They're going to be thinking of cash flow. They're going to be thinking of corporate responsibilities and so on. I hate to say that they might be looking out for number one, but they are far less likely to be thinking about the potential damage to the employees of the company that's to be taken over. And I think that really is the essence of the difference between a leader and a manager. And that isn't to decry what management is all about. But it's going to be more, impersonal, and they might even be looking at their own golden parachutes, and they might start looking for jobs for themselves. I think that would be the difference. Hopefully, we would have quite a few leaders in the company that would be looking to save the company as best they can and keep the people who've made that commitment and are so important to its success.
Excellent. Leslie, why don't you have a go at them? You know, when I ask you, Leslie, I'm thinking about, you've run your own business. You've been in a corporate setting. You've also worked in not-for-profit. So those are kind of executive level directors of things. So why don't you see what Barry has to say about that kind of thing?
Okay, I can do that. When a leader is building a team, regardless of whether they're in a large corporate or a small business or a not-for-profit, what kind of anchors or criteria do you look for when you're building that team?
That's a real dandy. One of the real challenges when you're starting a business, and it happened, I've been involved in a not-for-profit corporate organization and a charitable foundation, actually 3 of them. It's really, when you come down to it, is what is the raison d'etre? What is it you're trying to do? What is the goal? Why are you going to make a difference? And why is it important for your organization to take on this challenge, whatever it might be? So you need people to be involved. Now, they get involved at the strategic level. That's really neat. You've got people that are new, and they realize that what they do really matters. It might change, or it might eventually define what this new organization and its objectives are. I've always found that that's terrific for the people you've got. And you've got to pick people who, it's an eclectic mix. I've always tended to favor female employees rather than male employees. Whenever it comes down to it, and I have to flip a coin, I'll always pick the woman. There's several reasons for that. Women are more lateral thinkers than men. They tend to be left half oriented, which means they believe in deductive logic. We know that women are lateral thinkers, and that means that they're going to be able to see things more strategically. Guys and I'm saying this is about 92% of men are left half oriented and deductive. So the key really in a small organization is to try and get the people working together. Don't put an inductive person or an abstract reasoner in with a deductive person, or else they're going to say, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't logical. So if you do have to combine them, make sure that you're smart enough to figure out what kind of thinkers they are. Because there's nothing worse than a disaster of having an inductive, a deductive, and a lateral thinker all doing the same job. It just doesn't turn out well. I know this is a very complex answer to a simple question, but you're able to get that right when you're starting from scratch and you're not stuck with a bunch of people in a directorate or whatever it might be, and that's what you've got, and you're stuck with it.
Right.
So there's something wonderful about starting from scratch. I really love it.
One of the other things that I always notice, especially in a large organization, is that there is also one of the traps that leaders would fall into is they would start to collect people around them that think like they do, as opposed to people who would challenge them. And as hard as it is to lead a bunch of people who don't always agree with you, I really do think you come out with better outcomes if you can stick with that plan.
Yes. And again, people have to know that they matter. And you can't say that they matter if you don't listen to contrary views and opinions.
Good point.
And a contrary view and opinion is not being insubordinate. It's just another look at the challenge of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the objective or the corporate goals or something. Mm-hmm. And to be able to let people feel comfortable that way, this is, again, we're coming back. I know I'll return to the leadership bit. This is very personal, it's very emotional. And I'm talking not just about the leader, but the people who are part of the team. And if I could give you an example, I got out of RMC and I went into the infantry, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. I had my first platoon, which was 35 people, and we eventually went to Germany. When I got out of the Army, I was running a business. I was producing trade and consumer shows, and I got a call one day from a fellow who said, is this Barry Winfield? I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm Tom so-and-so. And I was a private in your platoon when you first came to the unit. I'd like to come and see you. So he came and he said, where can I park? I've got an 18-wheeler. So I had him park in the parking lot of the bank across the street, and he came in, and he was a trucker, with the keys hanging out the back with the chain, and he had leather stuff on and not too clean because he'd been driving for 3 days. And he and I went into the office, and I think my staff were surprised. There were gales of laughter coming out of the office for about a half an hour. And then finally we came out, and I said, I'm going off to lunch with this fellow. We may have a couple of beers, might be a couple of hours. We talked about all kinds of things, and I wanted to know what had he been doing since we were last together. I'm not saying this to aggrandize myself. It's the fact that I felt very humble that this fellow was a private soldier and I was an officer. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't seen him for 30 years, and he looked me up. Mm-hmm. And, wanted to come and see me and talk and have a beer. My goodness. Yeah. Isn't that something?
So, Barry, that talks to everything you've said, which is about connecting and telling the truth and being genuinely interested. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but I have dozens of conversations with people every week. And when I see somebody who I sort of know and I wonder how they are, of course I say, oh, hi, how are you? And they say, oh, I'm fine. And I think to myself, what the devil does that mean? So it's kind of like the opposite. I call it cocktail party conversation. It's very boring for me. I can't do that for more than about 5 minutes. And then the other thing is when somebody, if I ask that, starts to talk about something that really has gone wrong for them or they're worrying about, And it does tend to come out a little bit like it wasn't fair that this happened. But I feel really appreciated and grateful that they're willing to share it with me. I'm not just getting a I'm fine, you know? And I don't have to say anything because by the time they've talked it through and I've paid attention, they're back on track. Or they may have a specific thing that they want to talk about. So this has been wonderful.
Can I ask you just one more question before we wrap up
Sure.
and release you from our grip? What could I do as a new leader starting tomorrow if I want to make sure that my team can perform to the best of its ability? What's the one or two things I should really pay attention to?
You've got to get to know each of the people on a very intimate basis. In the Army, we had a notebook, it was your platoon notebook, and in it, you recorded everything about each private soldier, corporal, or whoever. Their wife, their children's names, where did they go to school, where was home, what were their parents doing, all that kind of stuff. You really need to get to know your people. It's surprising. It's not that hard. I often find I'll meet new people. Next thing I know, they've told me all sorts of personal stuff because you ask the appropriate questions and you show that you care. Somebody says, I say, where do you come from? They say Toronto. I say, where in Toronto? I say, well, you wouldn't know. Well, tell me. Well, it's the Etobicoke. Yeah, okay, but the Etobicoke east or west of the 427. And then they'll go on and they'll talk. And then we'll talk about that kind of neighborhood and so on. Where did they go to school? What sort of sports they do. And next thing you know, they open up and they tell you all this stuff. But it all started with you care. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, you want to know your people. But if you don't know your people, you can never maximize the potential of your organization. And that's what leadership is all about. It isn't out of books. It's not anything to do with rules and regulations. So yes, I spend 5 minutes with somebody and I ask the following 8 questions. What is it that is unique about that person? What are they proud of? Their family and all those kinds of things. And you're trying to get at the inner core of the person and they'll really reveal that to you if they believe that you care, that you're not just doing it to go through the motions.
Right.
Thank you for that, Barry. I have heard you over and over and over this evening talk about communicating and listening and establishing this trust that gets people to come forward and do their best. Thank you very much for that message. I think that's a really important one.
It's been a great pleasure. You really asked great questions, and this has been fun.
I'm so happy that you said yes.
Oh, I'm glad you asked.
They really care. And I wanted you to come and be part of our team. And I knew you'd be spectacular.
I don't think I'd go that far, but thank you.
I think you have. I would call it spectacular. Thank you very much for your time. Did you want to wrap up with a few thoughts before we sign off completely?
Yes. I wouldn't want anybody to think that in any way I'm decrying management skills. You do need management skills, particularly in government and large corporations. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about maximizing the human potential of your organization to make sure that you are better and that you reach more lofty goals than you ever could if you were kind of a cold fish and treated them all as just digits in a large organization. So even with people who are not necessarily the nicest touchy-feely people, they can kind of catch on to this. You can help them, but they need guidance, and you can't go to get it on a course. It's got to be one-on-one, I think.
Yeah, and you have to want to do it, and you have to care about others. Yeah.
You heard it here from Barry. As leaders, we're on a pursuit to maximize the human potential of our organization. Thank you for tuning in to this wonderful podcast where Barry articulates the difference between leaders and managers, how to build cultures of excellence, and the importance of frequent and honest communication. Thank you for tuning in.